I used to think that trust was like a well-built house, solid, enduring, and strong against any storm. But I learned that sometimes, even the most unshakable structures can crumble in a single moment. It started with something small, something so insignificant that I brushed it off. My husband, Daniel, had always kept in touch with one of his high school teachers, Mrs. Novak. She was about 10 years older than him, and while I found it a bit odd, I never saw a reason to be suspicious. They rarely spoke, just the occasional comment on social media, a reply to a story, a like here and there. It was harmless. Or so I thought. That evening, I was supposed to be out with my girlfriends. We had planned a long overdue night out, laughter, cocktails, and a much-needed break from our everyday lives. But fate had other plans. We were walking through the city when I spotted him. My husband. Sitting in a dimly lit bar, laughing, leaning just a little too close to Mrs. Novak. My stomach twisted into a tight knot, my pulse hammering against my ribs. "What is it, my friend?" Ava asked, following my gaze. I swallowed hard. "That's Daniel." She frowned. "Who's that woman with him?" I felt the words crawl up my throat, thick and bitter. "His old teacher." Ava's eyebrows shot up. "That's not just a teacher-student reunion. Look at them." I didn't need to. The way he smiled at her, the kind of smile that used to be just for me, told me everything I needed to know. I should have confronted him right then. I should have walked straight up to them and demanded an explanation. But something in me held back. I needed more. I needed undeniable proof. So I did something I never imagined myself doing. I followed them. I kept my distance as I followed them out of the bar, my heart pounding so violently I could hear it in my ears. Daniel never once checked his surroundings, never hesitated before stepping out onto the street with her. If he had been sneaking around, he certainly wasn't acting like it. Mrs. Novak's laugh floated through the crisp night air, light and carefree. She playfully nudged his arm, and he, my husband, leaned into her, murmuring something in return. Whatever it was made her giggle like a schoolgirl. I clenched my fists. Ava and the rest of my friends had begged me to let it go, to not jump to conclusions, but how could I? I wasn't seeing things. I wasn't crazy. I watched as they walked side by side, shoulders brushing, until they reached a quieter part of the city. The streets thinned, the bars and restaurants giving way to residential buildings. A creeping sense of dread coiled in my stomach. No. He wouldn't. But then. Mrs. Novak stopped in front of a building. A plain, nondescript apartment complex. Daniel stood close beside her, too close, and my breath hitched as she pulled out her keys. I took a shaky step forward. Daniel hesitated. Just for a moment. He glanced around, and for a split second, I thought he might come to his senses, that maybe this was all a misunderstanding. Maybe he'd turn around, head home, and I'd laugh at myself for ever doubting him. But then she opened the door, and he followed her inside. I froze. Ava's voice crackled through the phone against my ear. I didn't remember dialing her, but my hands had moved on their own. "Tell me you're not still following them." My voice was barely a whisper. He just went into her apartment. A silence stretched between us. I could hear the distant honk of a car on her end, the soft rustling of her shifting uncomfortably. "Come home," she finally said. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I can't. I couldn't just walk away. I needed to see. I needed to know. So I waited. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The cold night seeped into my bones, but I barely felt it. My mind was a storm, images flashing through my head that I couldn't stop, his hands on her, his lips against hers, his whispered words of love meant for me but given to someone else. I gritted my teeth. I wouldn't let them do this behind my back. So, gathering every ounce of courage I had left, I took a deep breath, marched up to the building, and pushed my way inside. The lobby smelled like old wood and stale air, the kind of place where secrets had settled into the walls. My heartbeat was a wild, erratic thing, my fingers ice cold as I pressed them against the railing of the stairwell. I had no plan. No idea what I would do when I reached her apartment. But I couldn't stop. Each step felt heavier than the last, my breath shaky as I climbed. The numbers on the doors blurred together until I found it, 3B, just slightly ajar, a soft golden light spilling into the hallway. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. Muffled laughter. His voice. Hers. The sound of clinking glasses. I clenched my jaw, pressing my fingers against the wood of the doorframe, steadying myself against the betrayal tightening around my throat. I could still turn around. I could still leave and pretend I never saw any of this. But then. A low murmur. A giggle. A breathy, whispered Danny, stop. Danny. That name didn't belong to her. That name didn't belong to anyone but me. My vision blurred with white-hot rage. Before I could stop myself, my body moved on instinct. I shoved the door open, stepping into her apartment, into their space, and there they were. Daniel. Mrs. Novak. Frozen in the glow of a single lamp, caught in the cruel act of proving me right. His shirt was unbuttoned. Hers slightly off her shoulder. 2 glasses of wine between them. A scene ripped straight from a nightmare I never wanted to have. Daniel's eyes went wide, the blood draining from his face as he took an instinctive step back. Guilt. Panic. Fear. Mrs. Novak, however, barely flinched. Instead, she tilted her head, the ghost of a smirk on her lips as she slowly set down her wine glass. As if she had been expecting this. My pulse roared in my ears. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, forcing the fire inside me to simmer just enough to speak. So this is what you do on your work nights, Danny? My voice didn't shake, but I felt the ground crumbling beneath me. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed hard. It's not what you think. I almost laughed. Not what I think. Mrs. Novak, still calm, still composed, took a sip of her wine before leaning against the counter. Well, she mused, eyes flicking between us. This is awkward. I snapped my gaze to her. Oh, you think? My nails dug into my palm. She wasn't even trying to deny it. Daniel stepped forward, reaching for me, but I jerked away before his fingers could touch me. He didn't get to touch me. Not anymore. I was going to tell you, he rushed, desperation leaking into his voice. I swear, I was going to. When? I cut him off, my voice sharp. When you were done screwing her? When you had your fun and decided I wasn't enough anymore? He flinched. Good. Mrs. Novak sighed, swirling the wine in her glass like she was bored. Like this was just another evening for her. He told me things were over between you two. I laughed then. A bitter, humorless sound. Did he? How convenient. Daniel looked like he wanted to crawl into himself. Please, just, let's talk about this. Not here. Not like this. Not like this? I repeated. My entire body trembled, my mind reeling. Daniel, I followed you. I watched you leave that bar with her, watched you come here, waited outside like an idiot hoping I was wrong. His eyes squeezed shut. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did. The silence that followed was suffocating. I took a step back, swallowing down the sob burning its way up my throat. I wouldn't cry here. Not in front of them. Go to hell, I whispered, turning on my heel, my legs shaking as I forced them to move. Wait. Daniel's voice chased after me, but I was already out the door, already gone. I didn't stop moving, didn't stop breathing until I was outside, until the cold air slammed into me like a punch to the chest. Then, finally, I let myself fall apart. The walk home felt endless. The city buzzed around me, cars honking, strangers laughing, neon signs blinking in and out of focus, but it all blurred into nothingness. The only sound that existed was the pounding in my chest, the echo of his voice begging me to stay, the sharp-edged memory of her smirk. I didn't even realize I was crying until the cold air stung against my wet cheeks. By the time I reached our apartment, my hands were shaking so badly I fumbled with the keys. The metal jingled as I shoved them into the lock, each failed attempt making the sobs rise higher in my throat. Finally, the door gave way, and I stumbled inside. It felt wrong. Everything inside this space felt wrong. Our framed wedding photos on the shelf. His jacket slung over the couch. The faint scent of his cologne still clinging to the air. How could he be kissing someone else when his presence was still here? A bitter laugh broke past my lips. Stupid. I was so stupid. I collapsed onto the couch, pressing my palms against my face, willing my mind to stop spinning. I couldn't keep replaying the way he looked at her. How effortless it was for him to lie. How quickly he had thrown away everything we built. How long had this been going on? How many nights had he left me in this apartment alone just to be with her? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through me. I needed to get out. I needed to erase him from this space before his scent poisoned my lungs. Without thinking, I ripped our wedding photos from the wall. The glass cracked beneath my fingers, the frame clattering to the floor, but I didn't stop. I tore down every memory of us, every reminder that once upon a time, I thought I was his one and only. By the time I was done, the apartment was littered with broken frames and shredded photographs. My breath came in short, uneven gasps, my hands raw from where I had clenched too hard. Still, it wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough to make this pain go away. A loud buzz snapped me out of my daze. My phone. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Daniel. I stared at his name glowing on the screen, my finger hovering over the decline button. He had no right to call me. No right to speak my name after what he had done. But I wasn't done with him. Not yet. With a deep, shuddering breath, I pressed answer. Hello? My voice was hollow. Baby. His voice was rushed, desperate. Please, just let me explain. Something inside me cracked open, raw and bleeding. You don't get to call me that. Silence. Then, softer, I'm sorry. I almost laughed. Almost. You're sorry? My voice was eerily calm. Daniel, I caught you with her. You don't get to apologize and fix this. I didn't mean for this to happen. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the edge of the coffee table so hard my knuckles turned white. Oh. Did you accidentally fall into her apartment? Accidentally take off your shirt? Please, he whispered, and for the first time, I heard it. Not guilt. Not regret. Fear. I leaned back against the couch, tilting my head toward the ceiling. You're not sorry you cheated. You're sorry you got caught. He didn't deny it. My fingers curled into fists. He wasn't even going to fight for me. For us. The realization hit harder than I expected. I had spent years thinking that if something ever went wrong, he would fight. That if our love was ever tested, he would prove it was real. But he wasn't fighting. He was letting me go. I'll send someone for my stuff, he murmured, his voice small. I laughed, the sound hollow. Don't bother. Your stuff will be in the trash by morning. Silence. Then. A quiet, broken, okay. And just like that, the line went dead. For a moment, I just sat there, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Then, slowly, painfully, I exhaled. He was gone. And now, I had to figure out how to live without him. The morning came too soon. I barely slept, my mind replaying every second of last night like a cruel, inescapable loop. The way Daniel looked at her. The way he reached for me like it wasn't already too late. The way his voice cracked when he realized there was nothing left to save. He had destroyed us. And yet, I was the one left picking up the pieces. I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, numb and empty. Sunlight trickled in through the blinds, bathing the room in gold, but it did nothing to warm me. Daniel should have been next to me. Instead, I was alone. My stomach twisted. I couldn't stay here. Not like this. I forced myself out of bed, dragging my exhausted body into the kitchen. My phone sat on the counter, face down, silent. No missed calls. No texts. Good. I didn't want to hear from him. I wanted to forget he even existed. I grabbed a trash bag and moved through the apartment with purpose, shoving every piece of him into it. His shirts from the laundry? Gone. His stupid coffee mug with the chipped handle? Gone. His sneakers by the door, his cologne on the dresser, his toothbrush by the sink, gone, gone, gone. By the time I was done, every trace of him was in a pile by the front door. A knock at the door startled me. My breath caught. Was it him? For a second, I imagined Daniel standing on the other side, his hands shoved into his pockets, his face twisted in regret. I imagined him begging. Pleading. Crying. And for a second, just a second, I almost wanted him to. I clenched my jaw and ripped the door open. But it wasn't Daniel. It was Ava. Her face softened the moment she saw me. Oh, honey. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I had spent the entire night being strong. I couldn't be strong anymore. Before I could stop myself, I collapsed into her arms. I hate him, I whispered, my voice cracking. I know, she murmured, smoothing my hair. You should. I clung to her like a lifeline. I don't know what to do. She pulled back just enough to meet my gaze. You survive. The words settled deep in my bones. Survive. I nodded, wiping my face. I could do that. I had to. Ava's eyes flickered to the trash bags behind me. She let out a slow whistle. Wow. You really went for it. I sniffled. I wanted to set it on fire, but I figured my landlord wouldn't appreciate that. Ava smirked. Understandable. Then, after a pause, want some help getting rid of it? I swallowed hard. Yeah. She nodded, grabbing one of the bags. Good. Let's dump this trash where it belongs. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself. And for the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe. The trash bags were heavier than I expected. Not physically, Daniel never had that much stuff here, but emotionally, they weighed me down like anchors. Ava didn't say much as we carried them outside. She didn't have to. Her presence was enough. She had been my best friend for years, had seen me through everything, and now she was here, helping me erase him. The apartment complex's dumpster loomed ahead, its rusted edges gleaming under the morning sun. This was it. I tightened my grip around the bag's plastic handles, my pulse hammering. The final step. The moment I let go, it would all be real. I turned to Ava. What if I regret this? She gave me a long look. Do you regret knowing the truth? I exhaled. No. Then you won't regret this. She was right. Daniel made his choice. Now, I was making mine. Without another thought, I swung the bag into the dumpster. It landed with a hollow thud, and a strange sense of relief flooded through me. One down. Ava tossed the second bag in with ease, dusting her hands off. Good riddance. I stared at the dumpster, half expecting the memories to claw their way back out. But they didn't. They stayed buried beneath rotting food and forgotten things, where they belonged. Daniel was my past. Not my future. Come on, Ava said, linking her arm through mine. Breakfast is on me. I nodded, forcing a small smile. Survive. That's what I had to do. And maybe, just maybe, this was the first step. Breakfast at our usual cafe felt like stepping into another life. The world had kept turning despite my entire world being flipped upside down. People laughed over coffee, couples held hands, someone in the corner was taking far too many pictures of their croissant. It was normal. I, on the other hand, felt like a ghost. Ava placed a coffee in front of me. Drink. I obeyed. The warmth seeped through my fingers, grounding me. You should take the day for yourself, Ava suggested. Do something that makes you feel good. I scoffed. Like what? Cry into a pint of ice cream? Ava tilted her head. If that's what you need, yes. I sighed, stirring my coffee. I don't know who I am without him. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Then maybe it's time to find out. The words lingered. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to stop thinking about Daniel, about what I had lost, and start figuring out what I still had left. Maybe it was time to start living for myself. That night, Daniel texted me. I stared at the screen, my breath hitching. Daniel, I'm coming by tomorrow to get the rest of my stuff. No apology. No emotion. Just cold, detached words. He had already checked out. I should have felt hurt. Instead, I felt nothing at all. I typed out my response. Your things are gone. Don't bother coming. I hit send and blocked his number. No more second chances. No more pain. Daniel was officially out of my life. And for the first time in forever, I felt free. The next morning, my apartment was quiet. Not the heavy, suffocating silence that had filled it after Daniel left, but a different kind, a peaceful one. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting. Not waiting for his texts. Not waiting for him to come home late. Not waiting for the nagging feeling in my gut to finally make sense. I was just here. Alone. And it didn't feel like a bad thing. The weight of last night's final text exchange still lingered in my mind. Your things are gone. Don't bother coming. He never responded. He didn't need to. He got the message. I half expected to feel regret, to panic at the thought of him truly being out of my life for good. But instead, I felt lighter. I stepped into the kitchen, still in my pajamas, and made coffee. For the first time, I made just one cup. It was strange, realizing how much of my life had been built around someone else's presence. The way I cooked, the way I cleaned, the way I moved through my own home, all of it had revolved around him. And now, all of it had to change. The first step. Taking back my space. I spent the entire afternoon rearranging furniture, moving things that had stayed in the same spot for years. The couch was pushed closer to the window. The bookshelf that Daniel always complained about being too cluttered now stood proudly by itself. Piece by piece, I reclaimed my home. By the time I was done, I was exhausted, but the apartment finally felt like mine. Not ours. Not his and mine. Just mine. The call. That evening, I was curled up on the couch with a blanket, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, when it rang. My stomach tightened. For a second, I thought it was him. But it wasn't. It was his mother. I hesitated before answering. What could she possibly want? Hello? My voice came out steadier than I expected. Honey, she sighed, her voice soft but cautious. I just heard the news. I stiffened. The news. Daniel had told her. She didn't sound surprised. I'm so sorry, she continued. I don't know what to say. A bitter laugh bubbled in my throat. You don't have to say anything. There was a pause. Then, carefully, I want you to know that I don't condone what he did. And I certainly don't expect you to forgive him. That threw me off. I expected her to defend him. To tell me I should work it out. That it was all a mistake. But she didn't. She sighed. Daniel, he's always been reckless with love. I thought he'd changed with you. I closed my eyes, the words stinging more than I wanted them to. Yeah. Me too. Another pause. Then, if you ever need anything, you can still call me. The offer caught me off guard. But I wasn't sure if I could accept it. She was still his mother. Still, I appreciated it. Thank you, I murmured. But I think I need space. I understand, she said gently. Take care of yourself, sweetheart. The call ended, and I sat there, staring at the dark screen, feeling something I hadn't expected. Closure. I didn't need Daniel's apology. I didn't need him to explain himself. I didn't even need his guilt. I had everything I needed to move forward. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I truly believed I would be okay. Days passed. Then a week. Slowly, the ache of his betrayal faded into something else, a dull echo rather than a fresh wound. I wasn't crying myself to sleep anymore. I wasn't staring at my phone, waiting for an apology that would never come. I was healing. Or at least, trying to. There were still moments, fleeting but sharp, where his absence felt heavier than I expected. Like when I reached for 2 coffee mugs in the morning instead of 1. Or when I caught myself scrolling through an old playlist we made together. But those moments came and went. Each time, they lasted a little less. Hurt a little less. And that had to mean something. The unwelcome visitor. It was a Friday night when I saw him again. I had just come back from dinner with Ava, feeling lighter, freer than I had in weeks. But when I reached my apartment building, I froze. Daniel was standing by the entrance. For a moment, all I could do was stare. He looked awful. His usual clean-shaven face was rough with stubble, his hair disheveled. He shifted on his feet, hands in his jacket pockets, looking like he didn't belong anywhere. Good. He didn't. The moment he saw me, relief flickered across his face. Hey. I didn't respond. Just crossed my arms and waited. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know I shouldn't be here. Then why are you? My voice was calm. Colder than I expected. I don't know. His shoulders slumped. I guess I needed to see you. I raised an eyebrow. Why? Because she wasn't enough? His face twisted. That's not, he stopped himself, exhaling. I miss you. I scoffed. You miss me? He nodded, eyes searching mine. I don't know how to do this without you. Something inside me clenched. Not because I wanted him back. Not because I still loved him. But because it was so unfair. Now he realized what he lost. Now he decided to care. I tilted my head. And yet, you had no problem replacing me. He winced. It wasn't like that. I laughed. Wasn't it? Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he had nothing to say. And that's when I knew, this was never about love. It was about control. He didn't miss me. He missed having me. He missed knowing I was waiting for him, loving him, forgiving him. And now that I wasn't. Now that I had taken my power back. He didn't know who he was without me. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, meeting his gaze head-on. You don't get to miss me, Daniel. He swallowed. No, I cut him off. You made your choice. And now you have to live with it. Silence. A long, heavy silence. Then, finally, he nodded. Goodbye, Daniel. I didn't wait for him to respond. I turned, walked past him, and didn't look back. And just like that, the chapter of us was officially closed. The door to my apartment clicked shut behind me, sealing him out and me in. I leaned against it, my heart pounding, not with sadness, not with longing, but with something close to relief. I had seen him. I had faced him. And I had won. Because this time, I walked away first. For so long, I had imagined this moment. I thought I would be shattered, weak, on the verge of breaking at the sight of him. But I wasn't. I was still standing. And that was everything. The aftershock. Ava arrived a few minutes later, as if sensing I needed her. I didn't tell her to come, I didn't have to. The second she saw my face, she knew. He showed up, didn't he? She asked, kicking off her shoes. I nodded. Tried to tell me he missed me. She scoffed. And you? I let out a slow breath. I told him he doesn't get to miss me. A grin stretched across her lips. Good. She grabbed 2 glasses from my kitchen and poured us each a drink. To officially being done with Daniel. I raised my glass, clinking it against hers. To never taking back trash. We both drank, laughter bubbling up between us. For the first time in weeks, it felt like celebration instead of survival. Rebuilding me. In the days that followed, I focused on one thing, myself. I changed my routine, woke up earlier, took long walks, filled my days with things I had forgotten I loved. I rewrote my apartment, new curtains, fresh bed sheets, a couch that was mine and mine alone. I stepped back into the world, dinners with friends, solo movie nights, plans for the future that no longer had to include anyone but me. Bit by bit, I was learning how to exist without him. And I was realizing that maybe, just maybe, I was better off. The final goodbye. One evening, as I was sorting through old drawers, I found something unexpected. Our wedding ring. I had taken it off the night I caught him. I had shoved it into a drawer and forgotten about it. Now, as I held it in my palm, it felt so small. So insignificant. Once, it had been a symbol of everything. A promise. A future. Now, it was just metal. I grabbed my purse, slipped the ring inside, and headed out the door. I didn't hesitate when I reached the pawn shop. I placed it on the counter. The man behind the register barely glanced at me before weighing it. Sentimental value? He asked, as if sensing something. I smiled. Not anymore. And just like that, I let it go. The pawn shop door swung shut behind me with a quiet click, sealing away the last physical reminder of Daniel. I expected to feel something, regret, sadness, maybe even guilt. But all I felt was light. It was over. Truly, finally over. For the first time in years, I was completely, undeniably free. Reclaiming myself. I spent the next few weeks rediscovering who I was without him. I went on weekend trips with Ava, just because we could. I started reading again, not just books we both liked, but books that were mine. I signed up for a pottery class, even though I was terrible at it. And slowly, the pieces of me I thought I had lost began falling back into place. It wasn't just about healing. It was about becoming someone new. Someone stronger. Someone wiser. Someone who would never settle for less than she deserved again. A different kind of love. One night, I stood in front of my mirror, brushing my hair, when I caught a glimpse of myself. I looked different. Not in a dramatic way. But there was something in my eyes, a confidence, a quiet strength, that hadn't been there before. I had spent so long pouring love into a man who didn't deserve it. Now, I was finally learning how to pour that love into myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest love story of all. The final closure. I never heard from Daniel again. No desperate texts. No last-minute apologies. And honestly, I was grateful. Because I didn't need an apology. I didn't need his regret. I didn't need anything from him. I had given myself something better. A fresh start. A life that was mine alone. And that was more than enough.